Maseches Kesubos Daf Chaf contains 5 small sugyas about how we establish the reliability of the signatures or testimony of witnesses. We'll end off the daf with a Mishnah, which goes on to how they testify about their own signatures. Do you need 1 or 2 witnesses for each of the signatures? Along the way, the Gemara will have a proof that's based on a completely independent sugya, that about if you find a little hill, do you have to be concerned that there's tumah in the hill, that somebody used it as a burial spot or not. So the Gemara begins, the Gemara has been discussing a case where you had witnesses that were signed on a document. The witnesses had died. They're not around to ask anymore. 2 other witnesses came and said they can verify the signatures, but they also know that the witnesses were psulim. So the Gemara had said, we had a brisa that said that if the witnesses' signatures were verifiable in some other way, the fact that 2 witnesses are here testifying that they were psulim is not a problem, and you can still keep the shtar. So the Gemara wants to know, what does that mean that you can still keep the shtar? You have 2 witnesses standing here saying that these witnesses who signed were not valid. So how can you use the shtar? So the Gemara says Rav Kahana's approach is that you can still collect with the shtar because you don't believe the second set of witnesses. You cannot contradict witnesses unless they are present. If you're not in the presence of the first witnesses, you're not believed to contradict them. You learn that from Eidei Hazama. Zomimin is when you have witnesses that are contradicted in a particular way. You have another pair that comes and says the first 2 could not possibly have known what they're testifying to because they weren't there, I know, because they were with us somewhere else. There, the halacha is not only do you not believe the first witnesses, you also punish them with whatever repercussion they were trying to create on the other one. As with every punishment, you cannot testify that someone deserves a punishment unless they are present. That would not be a fair court case. Therefore, zomimin cannot be created without the presence of the witnesses you're testifying against. Contradicting witnesses, even if they're not going to be zomimin, you're just saying the opposite, that should have the same halacha. That is the first approach, and that is Rav Papa's approach. That is Rav Shesh's approach, actually. And he says that therefore the second witnesses are not believed, you can collect the shtar with the first witnesses. Rav Nachman says it's not correct. It makes no sense to say that you would not believe the second witnesses. The only thing that's changed by the first witnesses not being here when they're being contradicted is that they can't admit it. The worst they could do if they were here, the best they could do would be to keep their position. So they can't make it any worse by being here. They can only make it better, so therefore there's no reason that we shouldn't accept the second witnesses if the first witnesses are not there. And therefore, when we say that we keep the shtar, we will not use it to collect. All it means is that we don't throw it out. And now you follow chazaka. Whoever's holding on to the money or the property gets to keep it. So if it's a loan, the borrower does not have to pay it back. If it's a sale, then the person who sold it officially, according to the document, does not have to hand over the property that he supposedly sold. Now, if the other person goes and grabs it, then he becomes the muhsik. Then the document would still be valid to say that he gets to keep it, and you don't have to change that. Now, the Gemara therefore adds, we end up with a machlokes. Can you contradict witnesses when they aren't there? According to Rav Sheshes, you cannot, because it is part of a hazama process. It is not a full hazama, but it's part of it. And hazama can't be done without the witnesses there. Contradicting can't be done without the witnesses there as well. Says the Gemara, the other approach is spelled out by Rabbi Avo. He says no. Hazama could also be done without the witnesses there. You can't punish the original witnesses without them being there and having the testimony in front of them. But the contradiction part of it, that you can do. You can throw out the testimony of Eidim, whether you're contradicting them or you're being mazim them if they're not there. Either one works. Now, the Gemara has spoken about chazaka. The halacha is when you have a suffix, you have a contradiction, you don't know what to do, then you follow chazaka. So the Gemara says that is like a case that happened with a person called Bar Shatia. he was someone who was sometimes sane and sometimes non-functional, and he sold land. So you had a contradiction between witnesses whether he sold it while he was sane or while he was not functional, and therefore the sale is void. The Gemara says that because it's his land, it stays in his property. Says the Gemara, that's only if he has a very strong chazaka, and that's that we knew that the land was definitely his because he inherited it. If it was land that he purchased, just like we're not sure if he sold it when he was sane or functional, we don't know if he bought it when he was sane or functional. He therefore doesn't have a strong chazaka, and he would not be able to hold on to it under those circumstances. His chazaka is just as weak as the claim of the person who's claiming against him, and therefore would go to him. Now the Gemara gets into how do you confirm that a signature is a true signature? What do you need to verify signatures that they aren't forged? So Rav Asi says it has to be compared to another star which is verified. If you're going to compare it to signature somewhere else and you're going to say, well, they look the same, that other star also has to be verified, because otherwise how do you know that one isn't forged? Now, in Naharda, they said it has to be compared to two things, either two Kesubos or two sale documents of fields. If it's compared to two, even if they aren't confirmed, then you assume that it is correct. And Simi Bar Ashi adds, it also has to be that the person who's holding these documents is not the one who's trying to make a claim based on the one that we're trying to verify. Because if it was in his possession, he could have just copied the signature. And therefore, the fact that it's comparable to a verified signature on a verified star doesn't prove that it's the same. The person could have just taken that and copied the signature off there. Says the Gemara, if that's true, so then even if he doesn't have possession of it, he could have looked at it while it was in someone else's possession and then copied it. The Gemara says, no one's that good of a copier. You have to have it in front of you while you're copying to be able to actually forge based on a star you're seeing somewhere else. All right, now the Gemara goes to another sugya, and that's, can a witness testify based on his own written account? That is, he saw something, he wrote it down. Later, he wants to testify based on what he wrote. He doesn't actually fully remember everything he's trying to testify to. Now, we have a rule that says you cannot testify in writing, not based on what someone wrote. That doesn't count as testimony. Rashi assumes that this applies here as well, and therefore this entire discussion is not talking about where the person has no memory and he's just saying, well, I don't remember anything, but I wrote it down. It's got to be that the writing is reminding him of something, but he's becoming independently verified. He's remembering it on his own, but the written account is just being used to jog his memory. So the Gemara says there are two approaches. This one is where he doesn't really remember much, just remembers a little bit, and the writing fills in the rest of it. That, Rav Huna says, is no good. He cannot testify to that. Rav Yochanan says he can. Now, in a situation where he remembers because the star jogged his memory, because the written account jogged his memory, that's where you have this machlokes. He doesn't remember much on his own. Now he remembers because he read it. If ever he remembered a good part of it and the written account just fills in some of the details for him, there everyone agrees that you could testify based on that. Now, what happens if it's not a written account that's reminding him, but someone else is reminding him of what he saw? So if one aid is reminding the other, says where you can learn from Rav Yochanan's opinion that one's own writing can remind him, and now he remembers, that one aid could remind the other, and then he remembers, that's fine. Now what if the person that the testimony is about, what if he's reminding him? He says, hey, don't you remember this? So the Gemara says, according to Rav Chaviva, that's good. As long as it jogs his memory, it's okay. He remembers now on his own. It doesn't matter what brought the memory back to him. According to Mar, Breder Rav Ashi, he cannot testify based on that because there's something suspicious there. The Gemara says that the halacha is he cannot testify unless he's a tzor v'mirabbanan, he's one of the Talmidei Chachamim. We assume he's not going to testify to anything unless he remembers it well. Now the Gemara brings an incident that happened with this, that Rav Ashi knew testimony that was relevant to Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana said, can you testify? He said, I don't remember. Then he said, don't you remember it was like this and like this? And Rav Ashi later went and he testified. So the Gemara says Rav Ashi saw that Rav Kahana was concerned. He was a bit afraid that maybe Rav Ashi was only testifying based on what he told him. So he said, no, I remembered it. You jogged my memory, and now I remembered it. So no need to worry. I'm not just saying over what you told me, because he was the Baldin. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to bring a proof as to how long people can remember things. And is there a consideration of the memory for a long time? This is going to be based on a completely different Gemara on a different subject. It's talking about if there's a little hill. So the Gemara says little hills were often used for burial. People would use it as a place to bury something because no one walked there. People didn't walk on the hills, they walked on the flat ground. So the question is, if you see a little hill, do you have to be concerned that it's tameh? There's something that is there. Somebody went and hid a mace there for burial. So the Gemara says there are two factors. If either of these two factors exist, you have to assume that it is tameh. Factor number one is if it is close to a city or a road, it's tameh. You have to assume that it's tameh. Factor number two is if it happened a long time ago, then it is tameh. That means it's very old. The hill's been here for a long time. We don't know how it got there. No one remembers the time at which it got there. That would be considered to be tameh. If it's relatively new and people remember when it came and nobody remembers that there was any actual burial that happened there, then you could assume that it's tahar. Now, what's the reason for this? The reason for this is that there's two potential ways that there could be tameh there. One is if there was a real burial that happened there. The Gemara says people would know about that. That would be something people would remember. So if this hill has been here so long ago that people don't remember anything about it, you have to be concerned that the real burial happened there and no one knows about it. There's a type of burial which people won't be aware of, and that's if a woman decided to bury her miscarried fetus, or if someone lost a limb, so he buried it there. That would be done quietly and alone. There wouldn't be fanfare around it, so that could happen even recently and we would not be aware of it. But that would only happen close to a city or close to a road. A woman wouldn't travel far away on her own to bury the fetus. It would have to be done nearby. So therefore, if it's near to a city or a road, even if you don't know about anything that happened there, you still have to be concerned that a woman went on her own and buried something there. If it's been here for a long time, you don't have to, even if it's far, you don't have to be concerned that a woman went to bury something there, but you do have to be concerned that it was a real burial that happened there and everybody forgot about it. So those are the two circumstances. If either of these two circumstances exist, you have to assume that there is a tumah there. Now, what is the definition of near and far, and what is the definition of a long time ago and new? So the Gemara says that each of these things is a machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Huda. Close is, according to Rabbi Meir, defined as within 50 amas of the city or the road. According to Rabbi Huda, it's defined as the closest of the mound. If there's a closer mound, then the woman wouldn't go there to bury it. In this one, she would go to the closer one, and therefore it's not called close. You don't have to have any concerns any longer. Okay, that's that. The Gemara is going to focus on what's called old and what's called new. So according to Rabbi Meir, the Gemara says old means that it's been here for 60 years. According to Rabbi Huda, it just means that no one remembers. There's no one around who could say that they remember when this hill was created or formed or how it got here. So the Gemara says, so now we have a proof. According to Rabbi Meir, 60 years, no one's going to remember 60 years. So when we're discussing how long testimony could happen, no one is allowed to testify about something that happened 60 years ago because you don't remember that. So the Gemara rejects this whole thing. The Gemara says, no, you can testify about something that happened any number of years ago because this is different because it's testimony. You knew at the time you saw it that you were going to be asked to remember this. Something like that you could remember forever. How a random hill showed up, people aren't going to remember that longer than 60 years. They didn't know that there was a significance to that at the time that it happened. Now, the Gemara asks, when we said a city, close to a city and close to a road, what type of city and road are we referring to? It can't be any city or road in Eretz Yisrael, because then you'll have to say that any hill is near any city or any road is tameh. You'll be making tumah all over Eretz Yisrael. We don't do that. The Gemara quotes that Rish Lakish says, we were very careful. We found all kinds of excuses to be metaher Eretz Yisrael, not to be metameit. So what then are we referring to? So the Gemara answers as follows. The Gemara says that the road means a road leading to the cemetery, and the reason why that should be significant is clear, because someone might have been on the way to the cemetery and it got late and they realized they weren't going to make it to the cemetery, so they went a couple of yards off the road and they did the burial there. They don't want to do it on the road because people walk there. Now, when we say a city, we're referring to a city that is near the cemetery. So the Gemara says, what would be the logic in that? Why would you refer to a city that's near the cemetery? Why doesn't the person who's doing the burial just go to the cemetery? Again, the function of nearness is that a woman or a person who lost a limb could have gone there to bury something. So if a woman needs to go, as she lives near the city, she's in the city that's near the cemetery, and if it gets late, she could go tomorrow. Why would she bury on the road if it's near the cemetery? So the Gemara answers that if it's within 50 amos, she'll go somewhere else on her own. If you have a hilltop within 50 amos of a city near the cemetery, she'll go somewhere else. She'll go out on her own to do the burial. If there's nothing within 50 amos, she'll take people with her to go further, or she'll take people with her and go to the cemetery, but then you'd be aware of it. So the only concern you have is within 50 amos. Now the Gemara begins the next Mishnah, which discusses what is the halacha when people testify that their own signature is valid. So if you have two items signed on a shtar, and they each testify to their signature and the other one's signature, great. Each signature has two people testifying that this is really their valid signature, there's no issues. But what if each person just testifies to his own signature and doesn't know the other person? Then you only have one person testifying to a signature. Is that enough, because it's his own signature, or not? Rabbi says it's not enough. They need additional testimony as well. You have to have more than that. You need two people verifying it. The Chachamim say, no, a person is believed to testify to his own signature. Doesn't need to bring more proof than that. So the Gemara, the explanation of this is as follows. When a person is verifying his signature, is he testifying, hey, this is my signature? He's establishing the concept of his signature? Or is he testifying to the original claim that is signed on the shtar? He's saying, hey, this loan happened. My signature on the paper proves that it happened. So if you say that he's testifying to the signature, so you have to establish that the signature is a signature, you need two witnesses. It's not enough for a person to say it on his own. If he's testifying to the original loan, then he's one of two people that are testifying to the original loan, because the other signature is also testifying to the loan, and therefore he would only need one to verify his own signature. His testimony by saying that this is my signature is testimony to the loan, and the other person's doing the same thing. So you have two, you don't need anybody else.